having preyed on our poorest.
Which makes this, I think, a national disgrace.
It was wrong. It was illegal. It should never have happened, and it should never happen again.
Here I say it, Prime Minister.
The early days of 2015, Tony Abbott was Prime Minister.
We've flagged progress in welfare reform.
There had been a cabinet reshuffle late the previous year, and the man who had made a name for himself, turning back the boats, had been moved into the social services portfolio.
I'm better with people than cars too. The back end of all of this needs a lot of work.
And Scott Morrison was holding on to his political persona from his former job.
This system will pay for itself over time, but what it'll also do is pay for itself by giving those who work in our system to crack down on welfare fraud and on integrity issues the sort of tools they need to be an effective welfare cop on the beat.
Morrison was looking for big savings in his new portfolio.
Here we go.
One idea particularly took his interest and would be included in the 2015 budget.
Fraud, investigations and compliance interventions will increase by 900,000 over the next 4 years. We're going after the cheats, Mr Deputy Speaker, and we're going to stop those cheats and we're going to stop those frauders.
What has become known as Robodebt had been born, the mass automated matching of social security payments with tax office data in the search for welfare cheats. But even before the proposal had reached Cabinet, it had been embroiled in a disturbing controversy within the public service that has now been fully laid out by Royal Commissioner Catherine Holmes. When the idea had originally been suggested in late 2014, in-house lawyers advised the Department of Social Services that the plan, quote, might not be consistent with the legislation. In other words, that it would be illegal without legislative change. The department's position never changed, and it was repeatedly conveyed to the Department of Human Services and was also given to Scott Morrison in the early months of 2015. But in March 2015, the Department of Human Services prepared documents for Cabinet which contained no reference to the legal risks and said legislation was not required. The scheme was approved by Cabinet and proceeded without the legislative change which Social Services had said was needed.
Everybody, the Minister, the Secretary of the Department, the legal branch of the department danced around their guilty knowledge that there were serious questions about the legality of this scheme.
The Commission notes that given the proposal was to undertake almost 1 million investigations and produce savings of $1.1 billion, it is, quote, not credible that anyone closely involved with the measure could have believed that there had been some fundamental change to the proposal so that it no longer entailed averaging or for some other reason ceased to require legislative change, unquote. Commissioner Holmes says in her report that it is worth considering for a moment what the legislative change would have entailed. It would have required a retrospective change to the statutory basis on which welfare recipients had been entitled to receive and had received income support going back years. It would certainly have encountered parliamentary and public opposition.
It's certainly been a tumultuous few months for the Abbott government. The crossbenchers have forced a series of backflips on major policies.
Parliamentary opposition was very much in the government's mind at that point of time, with the Senate crossbench populated by a particularly unwieldy cast of characters.
So the courting by government ministers has well and truly begun.
I am negotiating with the Senate. I always said I would.
Morrison had made clear to his officials a preference for avoiding measures that required legislation, with the government feeling it would have little prospect of getting changes through the Senate and certainly not in time to deliver quick savings. A crucial figure in the Robodebt story was this woman, the head of Morrison's department, Catherine Campbell, then the Secretary of the Department of Human Services. Jack Waterford was a long-time editor of the Canberra Times. His even longer career as a columnist in the National Capital has given him a uniquely granular view of the federal public service and the people who run it.
Catherine Campbell is a very autocratic person who, in another life, is a Major General in the Army. And she's very used to a top-down sort of management system and not very interested in or receptive to advice that she doesn't like.
But Campbell's top-down approach would come back to haunt her.
You must agree with me then that this document misled Cabinet to that extent.
I agree it was misleading to the extent that if the recipient did not engage, yes.
It's a significant oversight on your part, isn't it?
Yes.
The Royal Commission said That would be an extraordinary oversight for someone of Ms Campbell's seniority and experience. The weight of the evidence instead leads to the conclusion that Ms Campbell knew of the misleading effect of the new policy proposal, but chose to stay silent, knowing that Mr Morrison wanted to pursue the proposal and that the government could not achieve the savings which the NPP promised without income averaging. Which brings us to Scott Morrison.
Morning.
He had been told of the legal problems with the proposal in February 2015 in an executive minute from his department. The Royal Commissioner found that Mr Morrison knew that the use of income averaging might require a change of that policy. It was significant because it involved the question of potential unlawfulness and because of the large scale of the Department of Human Services proposal, which affected hundreds of thousands of current or former social security recipients.
When exactly was that, by the way? When exactly were you informed of the illegality?
Not until I was Prime Minister, when I was told about it, and then shut it down.
The Commission noted that when the proposal morphed from an executive minute to the Minister into a policy proposal he would put to Cabinet, it represented a complete reversal of the legal position without explanation. Royal Commissioner Catherine Holmes found that the proper administration of his department required him to make inquiries about why, in the absence of any explanation, the Department of Social Services appeared to have reversed its position on the need for legislative change. Not only had Mr Morrison failed to properly administer his department, Holmes said, he had, quote, allowed Cabinet to be misled because he did not make that obvious inquiry. It's a devastating indictment of a Cabinet Minister, but an even more alarming picture of how an illegal scheme, which wrongly persecuted over 500,000 Australians, slipped through the system. Scott Morrison's actions, the Royal Commission says, meant the budget process failed to expose the fundamental flaws in the savings assumptions and the assumption of legality underlying the proposal. There was more to come over the next 4 years as successive ministers refused to concede major problems with the scheme until it was finally closed down in May 2020 because it was illegal. Whatever happens to individuals named in the sealed section of the report, the deterioration in the quality and confidence of public service advice is an issue that should be of great concern.
Public servants became a little bit concerned with their careers if they gave frank and fearless advice. Now, I'm not saying that public servants ceased to give that advice, but it was given in a much more protective way.
Nevertheless, many public servants are driven by a desire to serve the public.
Public servants love their jobs. They believe that they are helping their community. They want the best possible programs. They are not people in cardigans sipping cups of tea or anything like that. They are focused, inspired people who want to do the right thing.